Okay, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Caitlin. I work at Square Books, and we are thrilled to have everyone join us in celebration of Olympus, Texas, debut novel by Stacey Swann, and she is joined in conversation by her fabulous editor, Lee Boudreaux. Before I pass it on to them, I want to tell you all about a couple, well, more than a couple of upcoming events, because we are lucky to have quite a few coming up in the next week or so. So here we go. I'll try to keep it brief. Wednesday, May 10th at 5:30, we'll have Jen Phillips in conversation with Chris Bojalian for Family Law and Hour of the Witch. So this is kind of a double header, double trouble. They're both a lot of fun. I've been looking forward to this event for months. Both of these books is great kind of vacation reading if you're finally kind of venturing out in the world. Real twisty thrillers, but you're not putting your brain in a box to enjoy them. That's at 5:30, Wednesday, May 10th. Sunday, May 16th at noon. This event is ticketed. You have to buy the book to attend, but keep listening. Peter Wolleben and Dr. Jane Goodall will be in conversation for Heartbeat of Trees. By pre-ordering, you get access to the event and a signed bookplate edition. And that signed bookplate edition of the Heartbeat of Trees is going to be available to you 2 weeks before publication date. So lots of special stuff, and I will put links to all of this stuff for you to check out after this event. Then Monday, May 17th, in partnership with our friends Lemuria Books in Jackson, Mississippi, Sean Flynn is going to be in conversation with Amy Nezukumatato for Flynn's memoir, Why Peacocks? An Unlikely Search for Meaning in the World's Most Magnificent Bird. That's at 5:30, Monday, May 17th. Last one, Wednesday, May 19th at 5:30, we'll be hosting Maggie Shipstead for Great Circle, high-flying literary fiction, and she's going to be joined in conversation with, or by, I'm never sure, book page editor, Kat Ackery. But enough about them. Let's get on to the main event and tell y'all a little more about Stacey and Lee, and then I'm going to go away. All right, so Stacey Swann holds an MFA from Texas State University and was a Stegner Fellow at Stanford University. Her fiction has appeared in Epic, Memorious, Versal, and other journals, and she is a contributing editor of American Short Fiction. She's a native Texan, and we're glad to have her virtually in Oxford, Mississippi. Lee Boudreaux is VP and executive editor at Doubleday, where she focuses almost exclusively on fiction. Books she has edited have won or been nominated for the Pulitzer Prize, the Booker Prize, and the National Book Award. And the authors that she has worked with include Square Books' own beloved Lisa Howarth, author of Summerlings, Madeline Miller, author of Song of Achilles and Circe, Andrew Sean Greer, author of Less, Claire Lombardo, author of The Most Fun We Ever Had, and Ron Rash, author of Serena. Phew, two very accomplished ladies. Thank you both so much for being here and everybody for joining us. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. I'm going to go away and hand it off to y'all. Y'all have fun. Oh, also, audience, please submit questions in the Q&A. We're going to have a Q&A portion. Okay, now I'm really leaving. Bye.
Thank you, Caitlin.
Thank you.
So Stacey, my very accomplished lady, it is a pleasure to be here with you tonight.
Oh, thank you for being in conversation, Lee. I'm very excited.
And a big shout out to everybody there at Square. We've already blown a big kiss to Lisa Howarth. Hello, also Richard and beloved booksellers, Bill and Cody and Lynn and the rest of the gang. We are really, I was so tickled to be asked to do this event and thrilled that it was going to be here at Square. So hello to everybody and thanks for having us. All right, so Stacey, I'm going to act like your mama for a bit here and we're just going to brag on you. So like NPR has said some nice things about you and the New York Times has said some nice things about you, but I think we just have to hand it to O Magazine because they said Olympus was the Iliad meets Friday Night Lights. And I feel like I've been talking about this book for 2 years and I should just be fired for not coming up with that line myself.
Or me either, right? I spent forever on my query letter, you know, before I sent to agents, and it never occurred. That never occurred to me.
Because that's a done in one line. Like that's just boom. Everything you need to know right there.
Nobody can resist that, right?
Nobody could resist that, exactly. We're actually, when we do reprints, as I'm sure we will, we're just gonna add, you know, like Olympus, Texas gets small and just Iliad meets Friday Night Lights gets bigger and bigger. All right, so you decided to take a real swing for the fences with your debut novel, and you decided to build it on a framework of classical mythology. So I just want to kick this off by saying, how on earth did you get that batty idea? And how on earth did you actually see it through? Because that's a tall order.
Yeah, I feel like, and you would probably know this, Lee, having worked with so many authors, but I feel like sometimes the most ambitious books are people's first novels because they don't understand how hard it's going to be to pull off this thing that they have envisioned. And then once you get past that first one, you know better, and you tailor down your expectations for the book. So the idea for the book itself came from the mythology before I had any characters or any idea that it was going to be like a family saga. I just was thinking that mythology, Greek mythology specifically, you get these really larger than life characters, and Texas has its own really strong sense of mythology. We really are into ourselves here in Texas. And the characters are also larger than life. And I always like kind of retellings, as a reader. I like to work with kind of other ideas and integrate them into the books and short stories that I write. So that was where I started. And then not really thinking about how many gods are in the pantheon and how that just starts to build upon itself. So at a certain point in drafting, I realized that instead of having a main plot with some subplots, that I unfortunately had given myself 3 main plots that I was trying to weave together, and no subplots really. And so that was also difficult while drafting, trying to figure out how to pace that. Also because they're all family members, so people are appearing in multiple scenes that maybe aren't in their main plot line. So yeah, it was a lot. There's a lot of character.
Well, what's so funny about you saying it turned out to have 3 main plot lines and no subplots was I remember every time I had to start writing any copy, whether it was going to be in-house or whether it was going to be actually the flap copy for the book, and I would take a stab at trying to describe it, and then I'd be like, there's no way this fits on a flap. Like I cannot talk about, what's happening in June's life without talking about what happens in March's life, without wanting to talk about Vera's life, but that opens up the whole Hap storyline. And then I haven't even gotten to Artie and Arlo yet. I had like 7 paragraphs written and I hadn't even gotten to 2 of the main characters. So for that reason, I feel like you and I came to the understanding early that we just couldn't lay out in any organized fashion what happens in this book, because you're right, there's 3 major strands.
Yeah, and I feel like, and that started way back in my query letter. I was like, okay, we'll just pretend this is a novel about 2 characters and not about 6 to 8 characters. But every time I read a review, even starting back from the Kirkus reviews and like Publisher Weekly that are the very small reviews, I feel like I owe each of those reviewers like a thank you gift for making them have to condense my plot down into a single paragraph. And they all did it really well. I was quite impressed.
Yeah, I remember that with the early reviews too, being like, damn, they figured out how to do it. And I wish I might need to lift that whole line and figure out, how to use it for my own purposes. All right, so as you were writing, who did it start with and who had to be left out? Did you have characters or gods and goddesses? Did you have characters you thought were going to manage to be in the book, whether as a main character or peripherally, and then they just could not get time on stage because there was already so much going on?
Yeah, and I wrote the first, I think it's about 70 pages really quickly. My friend had set up this contest that was like NaNoWriMo, which if anyone listening, it's National Write a Novel in a Month. It's this thing that people do in November, and they try and write a whole novel length amount of words in a month. So my friend Christy, she did this contest where we were all trying to be the one that wrote the most amount of words in a month. I didn't get anywhere close to a novel, but I got these first 70 pages, but very little of that wound up in the actual novel. And it was a very different tone. And I actually was using the gods' names. I didn't change them. So you had actual.
But it had a contemporary setting, and yet you were
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it was real wacky. And that version, I started off with Hercules, who is mentioned in the novel. So I've changed his name. People might not recognize him. They mention Burke, which is another child Peter has.
I never picked up on that.
Yeah, because he's never on the page, right? It's just that June talks about him when she's talking about Peter's first affair. So he had this child that was born around the same time as he and June's first child. And so that was Hercules in my head, but he's called Burke. And in that first version, I had Hercules, who was doing his 12 labors were set for him by Hera. And he was like, he had a crush on her, even though he was half her age. And he was trying to impress her by doing these. But as you can sense, that's not a very realistic novel. It's very hard to transfer the labors of Hercules into something normal Texans would be doing.
Yeah. How did you always know you wanted it to have a contemporary setting? Did it always in your head, you were going to sort of use some of the elements of mythology but tell a modern day story, or did you ever debate doing something more historical in whether you went all the way back to classical times or something in the middle?
Now that I think about it, I have never written anything that wasn't at least mostly contemporary. I think I might have written a short story or two set in the 80s, which is when I was a child. Yeah, I think it never occurred to me to put it in a different time period because that's just what I feel most comfortable writing in. I have an idea for a historical novel that I've been avoiding for like a decade now because I'm like, do I know how to write historical fiction? I don't think I do. So yes, always contemporary. Although I feel like I may have cheated a little bit in that the rural Texas town is more a town from the 80s in some ways, because I'm riffing on like what I remember from my childhood, but I've given them all cell phones. So it feels like modern day.
Well, there's something, being from a rural town myself, there is something of a timeless nature to some of these places where our, 70s or 80s childhood is not vastly different from, the life when I go home and visit my mother in Virginia. It is largely unchanged from how it was when I grew up. As you say, with the addition of cell phones, that's about it. And really bad cell service. So you get the device, but you don't actually get any of the stuff that makes it work. That seems to be one of the trademarks.
Honestly, for writers is the best thing, because they say that cell phones have really made authors' jobs much harder, because things that used to be plot points that could have real danger, you're like, well, why don't they just call them on their cell phone to warn them about the thing? So everyone should set their stuff in small towns where the cell coverage can just disappear at any moment.
I have to say that has come up in editing several times. Like you get to these moments where it's like, but that is solvable with the click of a couple buttons. So we have to figure out a way around it. It really has changed the way a plot art can work. And I've had many writers who have decided to set something in like 1993, like it was clearly some people had cell phones, but most of us didn't. And therefore the murdered body doesn't get discovered for a long time. They can't just GPS where the hell they are or whatever. But you used a word that I want to go back to, which was avoidance, because you have mentioned in some other talks how long not just that it took a long time to write a first novel, which is common. I have worked with many people who have spent a decade writing a novel, but you have specifically said you ignored your novel for 8 years. And I have always been under the impression that nobody would write if they didn't feel compelled to, because it is hard work and it is often a thankless job, and you do it in total isolation for a long time, not knowing whether anything will ever come of all of this labor. What were you doing for 8 years while you were ignoring? Were you just washing the dishes a lot? How did you ignore something that you ostensibly wanted to do?
I know, it's crazy. And I had to go back. I was looking, because I had written this essay about the process of writing my novel and using John Steinbeck's journals as kind of like help through my process. So I was looking back at my journal and just some other materials and realized, oh yeah, the first draft was 8 years before it was done. So there were parts of those 8 years was totally focused, especially the last year of that 8 years. But yeah, like I would work on it. I wrote those 70 pages. I revised them. I went to Stanford. I workshopped the first chapter at Stanford and then promptly didn't look at the novel for a year and a half because
You just worked on other stuff while you were there at Stanford, but
yeah,
why did you put this away and work on other stuff instead of, were you allowed to work on this with like single focus if you had wanted to?
Yes, I was. Although I knew I was in trouble right away because before even our first workshop, I had met the professor of that workshop at like they threw this like garden party before the beginning of the semester, and it felt very fancy. The Stanford campus is so fancy, you know. I'd never gone to a private school before, and it's all very overwhelming. And I'm having a conversation with John LaRue, who was our first professor, who was just an amazing. I have just such fond memories of John. But he said to me, "Oh, do you know what you're going to workshop first?" And I said, "Oh, I've been working on this novel." And his face fell, and he said, no.
Really? Why?
He said that workshop is best for short stories because people can read the whole thing. Workshop a novel, people don't know what's coming next, and they don't always give great advice, and it can derail. And ideally, you should have a workshop where you can actually give them the entire novel, which doesn't really work with the way workshops are run. And so he was like, "You can do it. I just don't recommend it." So I went ahead and did it because I was really excited about the book. And then it just felt, all of the advice felt so overwhelming to me that, yeah, I was just like, "Oh, okay, yeah, he was right. And I'm just going to work." And the smart move would have been to work on short stories for workshop and to keep working on the novel and just not show anyone yet. But instead, I just ignored the novel, which again ties back to later why it took so long, is that for a lot of years I struggled with a real writing resistance, and people used to refer to it as writer's block. But when I think of writer's block, I think of the guy in the movie that's sitting like Barton Fink, right? The Coen brothers movie. He's sitting in front of the typewriter and he wants to write, and he's there and he's putting in the time, but he just has no ideas. And to me, that's not how the resistance works, which is why I call it resistance instead. And a lot of other writers that I've talked to and taught, the same thing happens. They have ideas and they want to write, and I did the same, but the act of sitting down to write just feels really painful. And you're like, I would rather do the dishes than sit down to write. I would rather even clean the toilet rather than sit down to write. But at the same time, we love writing, and the idea of not writing at all feels wrong to us as well. So you're in this like really difficult space. And I think most people, we just kind of power through it. And you can still get books written. It's just a little more painful, and I think takes longer than people that don't have resistance. But what I finally figured out, which is true for a lot of people, is that we're carrying around these different ideas about ourselves as artists and just ourselves as human beings, and we're not evaluating those, and they're just causing problems. So I've talked to students who, when they were in the third grade, a teacher or a parent or even a sibling told them they weren't very creative. And like that has lived in their brain their whole life. And until they actually pin that down and think about it, it just lives as this echo that really can get in the way. And for me, I kept telling myself I should be doing something else other than writing, that I should be doing something that was like concretely useful, because I think I bought too much into, I don't know, just that idea of what usefulness is always a pragmatic thing. I don't know if that comes from farmers and ranchers or what, but it's a hard thing to shake off. But as soon as I looked at it dead on, even if I couldn't fully answer the question, once I saw what was going on, it became much easier to sit down and write.
And you said, I was fascinated to learn this, here after publication, after we've spent all this time editing, you said that the origin stories of your characters, which are an interstitial thing, as the narrative is progressing, we occasionally just kind of drop out of the narrative and we get this wonderful backstory, the origin of Vera's rage, the origin of June's, I don't want to say rage again, you had varied titles for all of them. And they were wonderful. They were always one of my favorite parts of the novel. And then you threw out at a conversation the other day that they had been an exercise to get you through this resistance. And you used the phrase, you felt kicked out of your own novel, and you made up these character studies to get back into it. So talk a little bit about that. And when did you decide to use them? And did they always have that structure that the final book had? Or were they not that neatly delineated at any point?
You know, it's funny too, because through I have always loved those parts of the book since they've been written, but I kept waiting first for Nicole, my agent, and then for you, Lee, to say,
these have to go.
We need to get rid of them. So I was just waiting for someone to make me cut them, and so pleased that nobody wanted me to cut them. But yeah, what I found when you're writing a novel, especially, like, you're creating this whole world. And the more days you spend writing in a row, the easier it is to pop right back into this imaginary world when you sit down. And what would happen is, if I decided for 3 months to avoid my novel, as I sometimes did, I would sit down and everything I wrote felt kind of lifeless and not actually connected to the book. And it was like, I think a metaphor I used at one point was it almost felt like the book had slipped into a coma and I couldn't wake it back up. And that was when I thought, well, I still want to be working on the book, but this is, just not feeling good. So I started writing all these character sketches, which were so helpful because also the plot was I had reached a point where instead of the plot feeling forward moving, it felt like I was just kind of treading water. And it wasn't until I figured out all the things that had happened to the family in the past that suddenly I could see what should happen next in the present day of the story. So once I had all those sketches in making the actual origin stories, it was often kind of taking the things I had drafted and then expanding them out and adding some, often some scene in there as well. And then I wrote them all, they moved around a lot. I think any different draft you might have looked at, those origin stories would have been in different places. And I was just trying to figure out, when does the audience need to know this? When can I give it to them and it will actually surprise them in some way? And not, I didn't want to hold things too long so that it didn't feel coy when you got the reveal. So that I feel like there's more in the first half and than in the second as a result.
Did you have one of those huge boards with color-coded characters and string attaching them scene to scene? How did you even keep all this straight in your head as you were moving it around and as you were deciding how to eliminate a whole character? I don't think we ever eliminated a character. We some scenes shrunk down, but you had to make all those decisions before you ever got to me about whether Hercules stayed in the book or became a character mentioned in dialogue between two other characters 3/4 of the way through the book. He ends up being kind of an interesting reveal. The fact that he was actually the seed that began this whole book is an amazing progression. So
yeah,
that's an extraordinary amount of sifting you had to do. How did you keep it straight in your head?
I didn't, in retrospect, I bet I'm starting to learn more and more that the visual stuff is really helpful, because I've never thought of myself as a visual person. My visual skills, my spatial skills are just really awful. But that's why we are in writing, right, and editing. But what helped in the kind of drafting process was about halfway through, I started using Scrivener, which is this writing software where every scene has its own subsection. So unlike Word, where everything can just feel overwhelming, you can pull this up and you can move your scenes around really easily. And then
you found that helpful? You found that elasticity made it easier to manage?
It did. And then they also have other things you can do. So I could color code with these little flags, the thread, so all of Peter and June scenes that felt like they belonged in Peter and June's plot line got one color. and the other ones got their own colors. So I could also make sure that I was moving around enough and not staying with any one plot line too long. And then when I dug in for the first like really big revision, I did go visual, and I used note cards, kind of bigger ones, like 4x6 of different colors for the different threads, and a different size one for the backstory ones, and spread them all out on a table.
Oh my God. People think you were crazy. When you had friends come over, were they like, what are you doing? And have you lost your mind?
Because I'm one of those people that I turned around one day and realized 95% of my friends are writers. Like,
oh, so right. So it's all just like, nobody knows who's crazy anymore. Like the scale is so warped that we can't tell.
It's like you always need at least a few people that are not writers, if you're a writer, to stay your friends, because they can, pull you aside and be like, you're overreacting, where all of your writer friends will be like, oh no, that was the worst thing ever. So it's good. It's good to have perspective.
Okay. How did you decide, or when did you decide to make this epic story with nothing but major plot lines, secrets, lies, betrayals, et cetera, et cetera? Then you decided to compress it all into 1 week. Why did you do that? Was that a further, constraint that you had to work around, or is that like sometimes you plant something in a small container and it makes it flower more? Like, did the constraint help you control the story, or like did you put your book in a girdle? That's what I'm saying? Was that the Spanx of your narrative technique to make this thing behave itself?
Yeah, it was so helpful. I had drafted about more than half of the novel, and I started realizing, like, I didn't even know. My first thought was I need to make a calendar and mark down when these events are happening, because I just had all these scenes and you couldn't really tell if something was happening 3 days after the prior scene or 7 days. And in my head, I think it was just summertime and stuff was happening in the summer. But because I had these 3 plot lines that started to intersect, it became important to know, you needed to know what had happened to all the characters by that day, right? Because it would impact how they would act in that scene, even if it was something in their separate plot line. And I remembered in grad school, my professor, Tom Grimes, who had my first semester at Texas State, he talks a lot about this idea of a clock in fiction, and how you always need a clock to give you structure. And that the clock is what makes sure you're not just kind of drifting around aimlessly, that you're moving forward. And so when I sat down and I was looking at all the scenes, like, there was this idea, when Tom talked about it too, that the shorter your clock can be within reason, often the better. And I was like, these things can all happen in 1 week. There's no reason, there's nothing that happens that needs time to percolate before the next event happens. And once I got that structure, it became much easier to draft the rest of the book, because it gave my brain just really likes containers or girdles. And it was really helpful. So yeah, I tell my students a lot now, like, it's good to pull out a calendar, and start trying to figure out when stuff happens in real time. Because it also helps you catch problems, right? If you're like, oh, but I actually need a month of time here because these 3 things need to happen, or things like that.
Right. I find often when the copy editor goes through a manuscript, they will find some of those chronological problems that I'm always like, oh, I can't believe I didn't catch that. Now, after you've been through something a certain amount of times, I mean, I don't know how authors keep track of it, from the moment this idea is born through all the iterations, to remember, that needs to happen in the spring because somebody went to the dance with somebody when they were in, high school, but et cetera, et cetera. And I just think, thank God for copy editors. They have caught many a mistake. And one time I had somebody who even wrote a whole note back talking about which flowers would have been in bloom. The author says it's spring, but the gardenia was blooming, and that wouldn't happen in Chicago I was like, oh my God, this woman is a font of knowledge. I was so impressed with the granular detail but it was catching real errors. It was a big family, like you're dealing with a big cast of characters, and those those chronologies and how one event triggers another can get very, very, very soupy down there in those backstories. So that weak compression, I can see how that helped. It seems like you had a lot of events in your mind as the book was taking shape, but the cause and effect needed a little compression to kind of make the dominoes set off like the way you wanted them to.
Yeah, exactly. So people weren't just kind of wandering around moaning about what had happened rather than the next thing in the plot happening. But yeah, I had a very embarrassing copy edit once on a short story where I had characters that were taking a road trip to White Sands in New Mexico, and they were coming from Austin. And I say that they stop and spend the night in Big Springs. And the copy editor is like, why are they stopping to spend the night 3 hours into their journey? And I was like, because I need them to be in a hotel room together. But that's not a good answer. It's like, oh yeah, I need to make their car break down because otherwise that doesn't make any sense at all.
That's funny, right? The way things that feel inevitable, hopefully when a reader gets to them on the page, but the amount of sort of, sticking it together with bubble gum and string that has to go on sometimes. Well, I mean, that's part of the fun. Do you find that fun in the writing? Because that's certainly what makes editing so much fun, is the puzzle pieces and sort of, the first thing that makes editing really fun is things like this. If you're a reader, your ideal version of life would be to read a book and then get to ask an author all of the questions. And I feel like that's really what you get to do as an editor. You read something and it's like, now we're going to just tell me in minute detail exactly why all this happened. And what if she was wearing a blue shirt? Oh my God. Do you like the puzzle solving as a writer? Or do you like setting a mood? Or do you like, Texas is very important in your fiction, and it is very important in this book. From the minute March is driving home and saying he's back on the roads of the only place that ever felt like home. Do you like setting a scene? Do you like dialogue? Do you like putting people in a fight? Like, what do you find the most fun to write?
All of those things. Yes, I will say that I do, I find in general, and of course this isn't true for everyone, that writers either really like drafting and they dislike, they maybe don't dislike revision, but they don't like the revision process as much as the drafting, the first draft. And then there's people like me that I just try and get through that first draft as quick as possible. 8 years, but you know what I'm saying.
It's a relative term.
Because I enjoy revising more, and I can tell that is true because when I'm drafting, my brain gets exhausted after 30 or 40 minutes. It's like, okay, we've made a certain amount of new words, and if you make me keep working, those words will get worse and worse with every paragraph. So I typically don't draft new stuff for more than 30 or 40 minutes before taking a break. But I can revise for 3 hours and not notice the time. And that's how I know that it's easier for me, but also I think I get lost in the flow of it more. So the puzzle part and the revision part I really like. I started writing thinking I was horrible at dialogue, and then I kept working at it. And at a certain point, people started commenting on my dialogue more than other things. And then I just went completely crazy. And so there's so much dialogue in this novel. So I love dialogue, and I especially love dialogue where people are yelling at each other. I am not a confrontational person.
It all pours out in your fiction. So Vera, your secret alter ego? You're like, I really, in my next life, want to go through life like Vera. Telling people what I think. Or,
maybe by the time I'm 60 or 70, I'll be Vera because all the filters will be gone by then. Yeah, I think one of my favorite works of art ever is Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf?
Wow.
Just people just ripping each other apart, just with words. And so so I love that part of it. And then I do often, especially with my short stories, I was always starting out of setting. So it doesn't surprise me that the novel is so rooted in setting. I will pick settings before I even know who the characters are.
Well, that's interesting.
Oh, I'd really love to write a story set X, set here. and then I'll figure out who some good people to put in it are. So I love setting.
That's interesting. I was listening to a writer named Kevin Barry do a chat the other day, and somebody was saying how amazing he is at dialogue and how he got to be that way. And he said, oh gosh, how did he say it? He said, I think if you can be good at something, then you can be great at it. So when people started telling me I was good at dialogue, I just decided to do dialogue more than anything else. And I thought that was such interesting advice. Instead of saying, oh, if you're good at this one thing, you better make everything else just as good. Like do it. If you're good at dialogue, then you better go work on your structure. You better go work on your plot. And he took the totally opposite approach and thought, if I'm good at it, I'm going to become great at it. And I don't care if my writing is just that one thing, I'll be that excellent at that one thing. So it sounds like you too decided like, oh, I have a real knack for dialogue. I have a real knack for setting. I can really run with that and let that lead me to what I'm eventually going to populate the story with.
Yeah. And I think too, because I'll have like clients, I do a lot of freelance editing, and they'll feel like they need a lot of dialogue. So they'll have all these scenes with dialogue. And then when I talk to them, I find out they don't, as readers, don't really like dialogue that much. Like they prefer scenes that are describing actions or just describing things or interiority. And I think it's real important to listen to the things that you love to read, so it's okay. So you don't have to write a ton of dialogue because you don't want to read that anyway. So of course your other stuff will be better. So yeah, I love that advice you gave.
How hard is it to wear a writer hat, a teaching hat, and an editing hat all at the same time? Are you using the same part of your brain to do these three jobs? Are you compartmentalizing so you can edit somebody's work, teach a classroom of young people how to write, and go home to your novel or your stories and write that as well? Or do you feel drained? Does one drain the other, or does one feed the other?
If I'm a natural born procrastinator, so it's freelance editing, so I get these novels and I'll be like, I'll have this back to you in 4 or 5 weeks, and then proceed to not work on it for 3 weeks or something. So when I would dig myself in those holes, if I'm editing someone else's book and I'm doing it for a bunch of hours a day, I cannot work on my own stuff very well because the other person's novel needs all that space in my brain to do a good job as editor. And but if I'm only having to do like an hour a day, like if I was a good planner in a way, then I can do both. And I think it is, because I started editing way back when I was working for American Short Fiction. First I was a volunteer, and then I was managing editor, and then I was editor. And that editing and also reading all those stories every month, hundreds of stories, I think it did more to make me a better writer than anything else I've done. So I think the editing really feeds and improves my ability to be a good writer, but it helps more in revision than in the first draft. In the first draft, I have to try and, I would tell my students, lock your inner editor in the trunk of your car and then just drive the car. But don't let the editor sit next to you while you're driving because you won't go anywhere.
Right. A metaphor that I'm sure like my husband would agree with you. If he came down here, he would find that to be such a useful and illuminating metaphor in so many ways, I have no doubt. All right, we have to talk about Vera some more, but I want to actually talk about all the women, all the female characters in the novel, because to my mind, they so drive the novel. And you use many different points of view, but I have to say, June leaps out immediately as an extraordinarily strong character who knows her own mind, even though she goes through this entire evolution over the course of the novel about what she's going to do with the rest of her life, what decisions she's going to make that may be different than all the decisions that have gotten her to this moment. Artie is in a profoundly difficult situation for most of the novel. And we see Arlo a lot through her eyes, as we see Peter through June's eyes. They are really revealing to us who these other characters are. And then Vera, of course, the crackerjack, she reveals everybody to us because she is putting up with nobody's BS and is just telling them truths about themselves that they might not want to hear. How did you come to these three characters? Were they always so central to the novel, or did they kind of emerge from this pantheon of characters and you just heard their voices clearer? And I've also heard you say some interesting things about women, particularly in small towns, that gives some insight into the roles they play. And I'd love to hear you talk about that for a bit.
Yeah, June was always there and really present. And I think I came to her with almost a little bit of guilt that as like a child and maybe even in my 20s, as I had read Greek mythology, I had no patience for Hera. I had no love for Hera. She's out there wreaking havoc on these poor other women that, didn't really have a choice in their relationships with Zeus. But getting older, it gave me more perspective, and I was like, no, you really have to look at things through her point of view. We're so used to looking at it through Zeus's point of view. Yeah. So she was always central, and Artie was always central too. She started as one of the main characters. Vera was more of a secondary character for a long time. She didn't have any scenes. I didn't think that she needed a point of view. So those scenes that we get of origin stories from Vera's point of view were written, later in the drafting process. And I had a real moment of kind of an epiphany, because originally Vera was just mean, fun, but mean and beautiful, right? Those were her traits. And as I was drafting, it was, all of this was before the big Me Too movement, around 2016, but it was around the time that this idea of rape culture was getting a lot more news attention. So like that horrible event in Steubenville had happened. There was an attack on a woman in India that had happened. And I just suddenly realized what a danger beauty can be, which is something that I hadn't thought about, that way before. And it just really opened up Vera to me as someone who understands that being that beautiful as a woman actually causes a whole lot of problems, puts you in a whole lot more danger than you would have been otherwise. And that just made her a much more interesting character to write. So then at that point, I wanted, before I had loved Hap so much and just felt like her husband was the nice guy, who bad things were happening to. And I'm like, well, if I like Vera this much, I have to find a reason why Hap has done some things that makes her actions legitimate in her eyes. That gives us empathy, at least for the bad choices that she has made. Right. So that was a real something I really enjoyed in the revision, was kind of coming to that realization about Vera. And then of course I had to rewrite all of Vera's scenes that were in the first third of the novel that I'd already written, because she wasn't that same person anymore.
Right. Well, you give such psychological depth to both Vera and March, who of course are sort of the people setting the match to the fuse from the opening pages of the book. And March sort of badly wants not to light the dynamite again this time, but he's not even in town for 24 hours before he starts lighting the dynamite again. So you clearly did a lot of digging into those characters to give them the depth they have, so that we understand why they're doing what they're doing. And you used a word yesterday, or one of your talks about March that was interesting, which is you always found him to have a certain kind of innocence to him. Despite all of these things he's doing, you were able to see that other side of him.
Yeah, and it, originally I had just gone in trying to find a way to make the god of war still be an empathetic character that you would want to stick around in a family and not automatically be kicked out of the family. And so it started off that way, but it is interesting to think about if the worst things that you've done in your life you don't remember doing, and you made no conscious decision to do them regardless of the consequences, then in a way it feels to you like you've never done them. And so all of these, some things, especially sleeping with his brother's wife, March has done consciously and must own those things. But a lot of the other stuff, is coming out of him, but is not part of his personality in a way that made him sweeter, I think, than he otherwise would have been. At least it's a sweetness that Artie can see. Certain characters probably have more access to that as March's friend. than maybe his family members. But yeah, it was, I'm very fond of Marge, but I know not all readers are.
Who have readers told you they really like so far with the book? Is there a hands down favorite? Is there somebody everybody's rooting for?
You know, it seems split between Vera, I think just because she's so fun to read. So people love Vera. And I think people that gravitate more to characters who are nicer or easier to root for, a lot of people like Artie. I think she's the easiest, you know, she's the person in the book doing the least amount of harm
and damage. I have to say, I think June might get my vote. From the minute she dumps coffee on her husband's head through the floorboard, she's on a balcony and he's down below, but she knows exactly where to hit him and just dribbles the hot coffee. And you have a great line in there about how like it's a cumulative effect, all the things she's so mad at him for. So he has no idea that morning what he's done, but she knows there's plenty of reason to dump coffee on his head. Caitlin is back, so I think it is time to let our audience ask some questions, but it's been a joy as always talking to you, and I'm amazed, having worked with you already for so long, there's still so much I endlessly learn about this novel every time I talk to you. So that was
what happens over 15 years, right?
Yeah, right. There's a lot of ground to cover.
So we don't have a lot of time for questions. I didn't want to butt in. The conversation was so good. So really, well, actually, this is not a question, but an anonymous attendee is endorsing Scrivener. They say Team Scrivener. So
yes, I agree.
Some solidarity there. And then this next question comes from Helen Ellis, who is another wonderful writer. Hi, Helen. She'd like to know, and y'all both already kind of spoken to this. She asked this question pretty early in the chat, but I wondered if maybe you had like an anecdote. So how was the editing process, Stacey, with Lee? Kind of putting you on the spot.
I could leave the room so she could be totally honest. She wants to lock me in the trunk. That's the answer, Helen.
I have been led to believe just by chatter, out in the world with writers, that editors didn't do that much editing anymore because they have to do so many business related things with the job that there's no time left for editing and that your agent will edit you. So I was thrilled that I was like, oh, look, someone's really going to help me make this book better. And I knew after, when we sold the book and I talked to people, I knew the second half was baggy and needed some help with pacing. And so, yeah, my only fear when I would get the manuscripts in the mail from Lee, because she still does it by hand, so you just got the shipment of the pages. My only worry when I would look at all the writing was that I was like, am I like her worst book ever? Does she always write this much, or is my book just so in need of fixing that that's why there's so many comments on the page?
There could be like a whole support group of my writers just talking to each other, like, and then when she goes up the side of the page, and then when she draws the arrow and it goes up to the side, I had a writer one time, I sent an editorial letter that was long, but it was a very long book, and he wrote back, he was like, if you hated it this much, why did you buy it? I was like, I'm sorry, this is when I love a book.
Oh.
Yes, exactly. I did once. I remember I was working on edits at a library with a friend, and she was like, "Oh, what are you working on?" And I just held up. It was I picked a page that was the worst, right? I picked a page that had it at the bottom, up the side, along the top, and there was an arrow to the back, and she'd been more back. And my friend was so impressed. My goodness, she's earning her money.
Well, just from this 35 minutes, it seems like y'all have a wonderful rapport, and it shows in this book. So, and I think that I failed to mention this at the beginning, but we are happy to have signed bookplate editions. It's a beautiful signature, totally legible, which is pretty rare. So thank you.
Really, I haven't developed my scrawl yet.
I like it. So yeah, look for one that is super legible. Maybe it'll be a little more, what's the word? Like worth a little more. Once you got the
item, if all the
legible one.
right.
Yeah, but so yeah, first edition, first printings. Also failed to mention that this is a Good Morning America pick. Congratulations on that. And I have actually no, I have an audience question, and then we'll kind of start to wrap this up, unfortunately. Skip would like to know, well, first he says great conversation. Skip, I agree. He loved hearing y'all, and he'd like to ask, what's next? Bold question, Skip. This book's been out for a week, but I'm curious too. What else are you working on?
I'm checking the chat, and that is the wonderful Skip Horak, who Lee also knows. Hi, Skip. I have another idea for a book, and I've been writing around it and not actually starting, just telling myself I needed to stay with this book. But the other day I wrote like the 500 first words. Which I'm sure will, not stay in the original book later. But yeah, it's Texas politics, sort of somehow related to this, and set in Austin. That's mostly what I know right now.
Wonderful. So I have a kind of a wrap up question, and because you mentioned politics. So out of all the characters in this book, so we know that Matthew McConaughey is thinking about running. I'm curious, who do you think would do the best job as governor? You can also say I would prefer not to answer.
I actually was joking. I can't remember if it was Lee or someone else I was joking with. I was like, I hope no one asked me about that, because I have such strong opinions. But I will just say that as a Texan mostly, I would just like our current governor to not be there anymore. But I'm a huge fan of both of the Castro brothers, Julian, who ran for president, and Joaquin, who is a representative. They are both amazing. And I'm a huge Beto O'Rourke fan. I've done a lot of volunteer work with his PAC, Powered by People. So if any of those people decide, really, if whoever runs.
I'm sorry, I meant out of your characters.
Oh,
I didn't mean to, like, yeah, it was supposed to be a fun question. I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
Now I've talked too much about politics, which no one wants me to do.
No, you're fine.
Thea would be the natural choice because she's a lawyer, right? And so many people go into politics from the law. I feel like, no, I think Thea would make the best governor. I don't know. What do y'all think? Who should be governor of Texas?
We'll see. It's in y'all's hands. And but in the meantime, we have this wonderful book. I've dropped the link to buy a signed bookplate edition from Square Books a couple of times. Appreciate everybody taking the time to join us tonight and buying these books. Without your support, we couldn't have these events in person, virtual, hybrid, whatever. And we're so appreciative. Stacey, we're so happy to have this book out in the world. I know that this is a tough time for authors, particularly debut ones, and this is just getting all the love that it deserves. And Lee, thank you for stewarding it, and for both of y'all for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah,
real pleasure. Thank you. Speaking of the great stewards of books, thank you to all the booksellers and all the bookstores who have stayed open and met their customers' needs through an extraordinary time and put so many books in people's hands, even when it meant working one at a time in the shop with a mask on and packing up boxes instead of talking to real people. So really, hats off to you all after this extraordinary year.
It's just this big loving book ecosystem: customers, readers, writers, editors, booksellers. Love you all. All right, well, I'll see y'all later. Take care. Wish we were wrapping this up at City Grocery, but next book,
here. Next book, all there on the roof.
No pressure.
Thank you so much. Good night.
All right, y'all take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, bye.